Live from Atlanta, Georgia, it's the Zach Ballinger Show, where we help you find your direction through purpose and passion. My name is Zach Ballinger. I am your host. Thank you guys so much for joining us out there today. We're on YouTube and Facebook Live. If you have any questions for our guests, feel free to answer them right in the comment section, and we will get them right over to Jody. But we're really excited. Jody, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Oh, glad to be here.
So, for the audience out there, I just want to give them a quick agenda of what we're going to do. We're going to go over your background, learn more about what you do, your career. We've got some long format questions where we'll ask you. Then we're going to get to our audience. We did have one question that came in since the schedule of the interview. If, like I said, if you guys are out there and want to ask live questions, feel free to. Jody, so what's your exact career, your title, and your position?
I am the Emergency Management Director for Morgan County, Tennessee.
Okay, and how many years have you been doing that?
About 30 in the emergency management field.
So explain the job. And people see the title and they're probably wondering, what does that exactly mean? Can you describe it where some of us that are out there that may not know what that title means?
Short answer is we do disaster planning and response, but we cover everything from there's a lost person search that goes on for several days, hazardous materials response, disaster response. We had a big impact with our tornado here in 2002, so we were heavily involved in that through my office. A little bit of everything. We're working hard now with the pandemic. I'm doing things with that. We're back up to the health department for things that's going on with the pandemic.
So imagine everything that, you can think of, whether it be weather related or any disaster, or that kind of falls under your umbrella as far as like a local effort. Is that correct? And you organize that?
Correct.
Gotcha. And so what do you like most about your job?
It's never boring. It's different every day.
I bet.
Know for sure.
And this is a tough question for some folks out there. It seems to be. I think this will be a pretty easy answer for you. But what is something you like least about your job?
Probably being on call 24/7, 365. You never know when you're going to get called out because you're always on call. But that's part of the job.
So does that include like holidays, or do you have relief, or is that pretty much 365, 7 days a week?
365, 7 days a week. I'm a one-person office. In the larger communities, you generally have more staff, so you take turns being on call. Someone might be on call one week and you're on call the next week. But being that I'm a one-person office, it's 365, 24.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. And so, what kind of education or certifications do you need? Let's say somebody out there hears this and they want to start in that field. How did you do it?
I got into it by accident. I started out over 30 years ago as a volunteer firefighter because I went to an open house at our volunteer fire department to see what the fire department was like. The chief was asking for volunteers, and the rest is history. I started out in the travel industry, but through the fire department, I became a volunteer instructor with the State Emergency Management Agency and a volunteer in the county emergency management agency I lived in at the time. And then when we moved to Morgan County, I became a volunteer here. And when the last director retired, I got the job.
So, someone sitting out there, I think where it starts is because you wouldn't probably graduate college or graduate high school and immediately just be a director of emergency management. I'd say that you'd first start out working on the grounds, volunteering in your community or some type of work that way. Is that pretty much true? Or
yeah, 30 years ago when I started, there was no college degree for emergency management, and now there are several colleges that offer emergency management degrees, and through the state legislature there is now it's codified in the TCA code that for an emergency management director you need to have a college degree.
Gotcha. So there's now a degree path for students out there that are listening that might be interested in this. But I also think it's good to get experience on the ground when you're dealing with these kind of emergencies to see if you're in a position where you can handle. For me, I couldn't handle the stress, and so I think it's good for people to probably get out there on the front lines to first see if it's something they want to explore further. Would that be
Yeah.
kind of
Oh, yeah, I would agree. You can volunteer with your local, volunteer fire department. You can volunteer in your local emergency management office. There's a good way to get in and see without the commitment to see if that's something that you'd be interested in and which different pathway you might want to take in that field.
And so, you kind of talked about the job, but, and I know this varies for everyone, so it's always a tough question, but just what does a typical day look like? Let's say you don't have a big emergency going on. What does a typical day look like in your shoes?
Mostly paperwork and computer work. Right now, I'm working on quarterly grant reports because I also do the Homeland Security grants. Working on some of the COVID grant paperwork, helping the county exec's office with that. Right now, also doing ordering supplies, PPE supplies for EMS, fire department, law enforcement, the courthouse, organizing that and getting that stuff ordered for them. Working on setting up training classes for the fire departments and emergency response in the county.
So that falls, and I'm learning this too, as my audience is. So any of the grant proposals, which a grant is, getting state funds or federal government funds. So all that you have to write. Is that correct?
Some of it you have to write, some of it comes predetermined. You have a certain amount of money and then you just have to write a narrative to justify getting that money. And those grants are, through the Homeland Security and through TEMA.
Interesting. So even if do you enjoy that process of the job, or do you find it a little bit tedious, or just because I know some people out there actually love writing grants. So just out of curiosity.
I enjoy it because I like, especially since we're such a rural and poor county, I like trying to bring, get that money brought into the county.
It's awesome. And, it doesn't have to be, obviously you said you kind of fell into the job, but what's something you dreamed about being when you were in grade school? Was there a dream career that you always wanted to be?
Not really, because I'm old enough that when girls were in school, you didn't really think about having a career. But when I got out of high school, I did go into travel. I worked for the airline industry for several years. I was actually a manager for a small airline. Like I said, I took a complete 180 from where I started out to what I'm doing now.
And so talk about, the challenges when an emergency comes to your county. You mentioned the 2002 tornado. I actually remember that pretty well because I am from Wartburg myself, and I do remember the devastation that it caused to the Mossy Grove community as well as some other communities. But talk about what kind of challenges that you deal with during that, and what all do you have to do? I don't think people really know what everything you're responsible for when something like that happens.
When something like that happens, you open up what we call the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center, and then you get all your department heads, sheriff, city police, fire chiefs, county exec, finance, everybody into one meeting room while the primary responders are out taking care of the disaster. We're doing logistics, getting the state in to help with response, to help with cleanup, to helping the county exec get the paperwork ready to get to the governor to have a declaration for a disaster so we can get the FEMA, money in to help people that don't have insurance. Because, if you have a house insurance, FEMA, doesn't cover you, but it covers those without insurance. And it also covers repairing the infrastructure, road damage, public, utility damage, power poles are all down, getting that all in and tracking all the time, all the hours, all the money and everything that was going on with that particular disaster.
And just so you guys are out there, FEMA's the Federal Emergency Management Association. It's like the government's help, I would say, kind of like their emergency services department at a federal level. Would that be an accurate statement?
Correct. You've got FEMA at the federal, you've got TEMA, which is the Tennessee Emergency Management Agency at the state level, and then you get the County Emergency Management Director at the county level.
And I'd say when something like that happens, it takes a high level of coordination because you're probably teaming up with the state, especially when those big hurricanes came through. You're teaming up with the state as well as the federal department. So there's probably a lot of coordination efforts on your part. Is that right?
Yeah, and it doesn't just take the day of the disaster. Like example for the tornado, we had a recovery committee that was active for a year after the tornado, helping those that were impacted by the storm.
Well, we certainly thank you for that work. I know that can't be easy. Especially when you're right in the middle of it, and you've lived in the county and you've done this job for that long and see this devastation. I know, it was even hard on me because just because Wartburg and Morgan County is just such a close knit community that we kind of know everyone, and so when a disaster like that comes, you really have to show a level of patience and a level of a dedication to it. So thank you for your service on that. Let's think back to your career journey. You said you started off. What would you say you started off in? I can't remember.
Airline industry. I worked for the airlines, and I was an airport manager.
And then you went into the volunteer side for the fire department. Is that right?
Yes.
And so let's think back to your journey. It can be either through that or it can be with the emergency management services. When I talk to successful people or people that are good in their work, they often have adversity or there's a story that's kind of happened behind the scenes in their career, whether that's a failed test or a health issue or something comes up along and kind of throws them for a loop. Can you think back over your career of any circumstance that happened with you?
Well, we talk about health issues. The only issues I had several years ago, I was sick for a year or so, and I was actually working in the ice storm that we had from my hospital bed.
Wow. So you didn't quit. You had
No, I
to.
didn't quit. What are you going to do in a hospital? You're sitting there bored anyway, right? So you might as well work.
I guess that's why you have this job. You're pretty tough. So still working from a hospital bed. That sounds pretty dedicated. So what areas can you had this force. It's just a one man show. You said it's just a one woman show. You're kind of in charge of it. Is there anybody people can do to volunteer? Let's say they're in Morgan County. What do you need right now as far as let's say, because the reason I'm asking this, I encourage students, especially if you're in high school or college, to get out in your local communities and volunteer. Because first of all, it's a great way to learn professional skills and learn skill sets of communication. Second of all, it gives back to your community. Third of all, it's an ability to network. And so I teach students really to get out there and put some hours in as far as service. What do you think right now, if you had to guess, on where is the resources needed if somebody wanted to volunteer for the county?
Well, one of the things I've been trying to get started in our county is what we call a damage assessment team. And what that does is a lot of people like to volunteer, but they're not necessarily inclined to do the medical response because they don't like blood or they don't like injuries, or they may not want to do firefighting because they can't envision themselves going into a burning building. But like with the damage assessment teams that we would like to get together, that is something you really only do. You do training once a year, but you help in a disaster. If we want to go out after, say, the tornado or our ice storm, to do damage assessment to see what kind of damage we've had and feed that back into the emergency operations center and let us know where all that damage is so we can get the teams in to help fix, rebuild what we've got. And that's 4 hours training a year, and it's a lot of it's just driving up and down the roads after a disaster to let us know, what kind of damages the houses may have or how many trees are down in a certain area.
And that's a volunteer position,
It's
correct?
volunteer.
Gotcha. So
And they're
that's
only called upon if there's a disaster.
right. And so the only probably requirement is you have to have that 4 years. 4 years. You said
4 hours
4 hours of training before
a
you
year.
probably begin that. Gotcha. And so, where can people learn more about that? Is it at a county website or anything they can do to?
They can call my office,
Okay,
and I can give them more information.
gotcha. Perfect. And so, what's some of the? You mentioned 2002, the tornadoes. What other major disasters have you seen in the county that's really where you could that are memorable?
One good one, we had three train derailments since I've been director. The one we had went off the tracks in the Lansing area of the county. You took the ATV back as far as you could, and then you had to go another mile or two to get to where the train derailed. They never seem to derail at a good road intersection. It's always out in the middle of nowhere. So that was interesting trying to get out there. One we had four years ago, yeah, 4 years ago this spring, we had a plane crash land on 27 there right in front of Save a Lot. Uh, Fortunately, the pilot wasn't injured. Uh, but getting the NTSB in to do their investigation was interesting. And as you talked about things that happened, I was actually on my way to Michigan when that plane happened to go to my dad's funeral. So I helped coordinate that on the drive to Michigan. So
Wow.
like I said, you're always on call no matter where you're at. Um, Fortunately, with contacts and being in a small community, other EMA directors are in the same boat because there's a lot of us that are just one man shows. We all help each other. So neighboring EMAs and local responders, all come together and help if something like that happens and you have to be out of the area.
Well, I was going to ask, somebody might be thinking, well, my gosh, when do you ever have a vacation? Um, you
You're
probably,
never on vacation.
and
You know,
that's, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, because I am, one show, I mean, I'm always on call. So even if I do go on vacation, I'm still managing emails and phone calls. And if something happens and then I rely on others, hopefully those in the county can handle it, what's going on. Or if need be, surrounding county EMA directors will come in and do the management part of it if it's needed. But knock on wood, that hasn't happened.
Well, and I think too, you wouldn't change your job for anything in the world because it's kind of like a higher calling to you. You started out just volunteering as a firefighter and then evolved into this position. So for you, it's kind of like what you're passionate about is making sure the county stays healthy, safe, has all the resources to continue on, and probably build a family there where everything matters. So I think that's such a cool job from looking on the outset. Now, there's obviously, like you talked about, some of the downsides of it, of course, going through the natural emergencies. But I think for certain that your career definitely is very, very unique. Was there, as far as like development, like career development, does the state require you to take a certain amount of courses every year or do additional training or anything like that as far as directors at your level?
Yeah, there is ongoing training. There is a minute, like I said, that the college degree is now required. And even before that, there was professional development courses that were required. There's always training going on. There's a yearly training conference, the State Emergency Management Association. We conduct a training conference every year. Of course, because of pandemic, we didn't have it this year. I'm on the State Emergency Management Association board. I was president of that association 10 years ago. I'm currently still on the board as treasurer. So there is training all the time. And you
I
don't use
bet.
it, you lose it.
Right. I bet. And so let's get into some of the questions that have come in from the broadcast just to make sure. And some of these you may not know, and that's fine. But somebody says they want to be a professional firefighter, not volunteer. They actually want to do it for a career. What advice would you have for them?
There's classes you can take for that, but I would also, if they're just starting out, a good way to start is through a volunteer fire department because you do get the experience. Sometimes the larger departments won't hire you without any experience, and we've got several of our firefighters in the county that are volunteer with our local departments, but they also work for the city of Knoxville and they work for the city of Oak Ridge. So it could be a great way to get that experience and to get you hired with a larger department.
You're, I've got a book coming out this November. It's about how to find a career you love. I I write a whole chapter on the volunteering part because I think it's a big part of the piece that we miss. Is first of all, it can spark your passion as far as what you're dedicated to. You meet other people around you, but another thing too is it exposes you to the career before you go down that path. So, you may think I'm 18, you've never even dealt with what a firefighter does on a daily basis. Why not go ahead and start as a volunteer in one of your local smaller communities? I'm sure they need people too, and then see if it's a career for you. You can continue to go to college or you can continue to work full time, but I agree with you. I think you should dabble in it first before you go all in, because the last thing you want to do is get into those training certifications as a firefighter and be like, wait a minute, I don't want to go into a burning house, or, wait a minute, this is not what I signed up for. So I think me and you kind of share that same vision about volunteering. And right now, you can volunteer at a lot of these volunteer shelters. I think even, my broadcast goes out throughout the United States. So I'm sure there's people listening in big cities. They probably never even knew that smaller counties rely on volunteer fire departments. Is that pretty much true? Like in your rural towns, and most of it's the volunteer.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, exactly. In our county, we're all volunteer. We don't have a paid firefighter in the county. And that's the way in most places across the country. You're only going to find paid firefighters in your larger cities for the most part. Off the top of my head, I think the statistic is that 80% of the firefighters in the country are volunteer. So yeah, and they always need help. There's never enough people because, like with the volunteer fire department, it's relying, your response is relying on the people being home. So it's like when we started out in the fire department, my husband and I both, at, we had just moved to Tennessee, so I wasn't working, and my husband with his job, when he was home, he'd work away 60 days and home for 30 days, so he was home for 30 days. So we were generally, a lot of the times, the only volunteers available during the day, during the week. We relied on surrounding fire departments to come in and back us up, but that was one of the benefits of us volunteering because people work.
Right. And I think, you said that the statistics around 85% are these rural volunteer. So what better way for you, if you think you want to be a professional firefighter, to jump into that before you get into the 15%? And I think, like I got listeners listening all around in big cities. Of course, I'm in Atlanta, and we obviously have our own fire department. So people just take that kind of for granted if they've grown up in the city, that there is a paid firefighters. But I don't think a lot of people that's been out of the bigger cities realize that it's heavily involved in volunteer work and rural in a rural setting. So it's very good information. Um, so if somebody wanted to work in a big city in a team like yours, can you explain how it's different from working? You're just a one woman show. We talked about that, but what does it look like for Atlanta or Chicago? Or do they have like a board? Is there multiple people helping them? Would you have helpers under you? And would that require college? Do you know?
Well, and the requirements are different for each location, but yeah, in a larger city, you're going to have the director, you're going to have the assistant director, you're going to have an operations officer, you're going to have a logistics officer, you're going to have a training officer, you're going to have all these other, eight department, sub-department heads, I guess you could call them, that's going to be responsible for other things. Like Knox County, for example, I think they've got 4 or 5 people in their EMA office. Um, and it just depends on where you're at. But yeah, the larger cities are going to have a lot more people because they have a lot more responsibility.
Right. And they'll and they have a lot more that could potentially happen as far as disasters, of course, because they cover a bigger ground. So that kind of makes sense. And so, kind of the last question for you is, where do you, where do you see this? Do you see this field growing? I know that's kind of a silly question, but it feels like there's natural disasters all the time. It feels like there's hurricanes, there's fires. Do you think this is a career that'll definitely be around to stay? As far as a lot of people ask that is in any field, and I'm sure it is, but I just want to make sure that I'm on the right track.
Yeah, I mean, this field has been around for a long time. It's been at least since the 50s, I think, when the Department of Civil Defense was formed, and that has evolved into emergency management. But as you mentioned, with the disasters that are going on, and people realizing more how much the management and pre-planning and working out some of the things, mitigating things before a disaster happens, that it's becoming more important. And the pandemic has shown even more how important emergency management is, and pre-planning and being able to respond and help other agencies.
Well, Jody, this has been really fascinating. Thank you for coming on the show and sharing your career journey, your passion. This is just great. I think it shines a light on a lot of people that had questions about emergency management services, and may even enlighten them on something that they may want to do in the future. So, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. I know you're added fighting emergencies and writing grants. So, thanks for your time.
Well, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right. You take care and have a great day.
You too.